Hey everybody, my name's Alex, and this is Bento Radio. Now, before we get started, you may have noticed I missed a week. I decided to, for the first time in a long time, take a little break from the show and take a break for Christmas. I was originally talking about Tokyo Godfathers, the seminal Satoshi Kon work that is what many people consider to be one of the best Christmas movies ever made. For that, but I decided I just wanted to hang out with my family and all that fun jazz. So, if you missed me, I'm sorry, but also I'm back, so that's good. If you really like the show and haven't yet, I encourage you to follow it. Follow it over on YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can click the subscribe button below and also ring that notification bell so when new episodes are released. If you are listening to the show, you can subscribe to it wherever you're hearing me right now, via that online or wherever you listen to podcasts. So go do that too. If you really love what I do and you want more of it, you want the most of it, you can check out the show's website, which is bento-box.ghost.io. And that is where any of the stuff I've written will be, including an article that I'm forever working on, but I will get to eventually finishing. But I've got a couple articles up there already, along with a bunch of the episodes of the podcast, a lot of them at this point, and you can go check that out. That also, at the bottom of that site, has all of my social links, meaning Instagram, Blue Sky, the works, so you can go check that out too. That website again is bento-box.ghost.io. And that link will be in the description of this YouTube video, as well as the YouTube channel, as well as the podcast and the episode description for the podcast. So definitely go check that out. Now, without further ado, I want to jump into what we're talking about this week. The very first day of the year. And that's a little show from previous season called Gachiakuta. So without further ado, take it away, give us a nice, tight little plot synopsis. Ooh, that was bad. But give us the plot synopsis.
Gachiakuta follows Ruto, a poor orphan living in the slums of a wealthy floating city where the ruling class enjoys excess while discarding both trash and people deemed worthless. Ruto survives by scavenging garbage and repairing broken objects, a mindset taught to him by his adoptive father, Recto, who believes items should be respected rather than thrown away. Ruto's life is shattered when Recto is murdered and Ruto is falsely accused of the crime. Without a fair trial, he is sentenced to be thrown into the abyss, a massive pit where society dumps its waste and criminals. Instead of dying, Ruto awakens in a hellish world below known as the ground, buried under mountains of trash where monstrous trash beasts roam. He is saved by Engine, a member of the Cleaners, fighters who wield powerful weapons called vital instruments, objects that gain strength through emotional attachment. Ruto discovers he has a rare ability to draw out overwhelming power from discarded items, making him both dangerous and unique. As he trains with the Cleaners, Ruto hardens into a fighter driven by rage and purpose, vowing to survive the ground, uncover the truth behind Recto's death, and one day climb back up to take revenge on the society that threw him away.
Now that the plot synopsis is out of the way, I want to start by talking about Shonen action shows as a whole, and I don't even want to limit it to Shonen Jump adaptations, although the examples I'll be giving here will largely be Shonen Jump adaptations. Because I think it's important to start there so you can see how truly different Gachiakuta is from the stuff that came before, even stuff it's a contemporary to in some key ways, and we'll get to that in a second. But in the before times, in the bubble era, in the original popping off of anime, in the shonen anime that made anime a household term, there were 3 or 4 shows that everybody considered to be the big 3 or the big 4. Those shows were, and this is in no particular order, I'm not ascribing any kind of better or worse quality here, I'm just listing them. And I'll probably list them multiple different ways. Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach. If someone's talking to you about the big four, that's what they're talking about. There haven't really been replacements to these shows, because what those shows did is something that other shows don't do anymore, but aren't readily doing anymore, and don't do anymore for a handful of different reasons. First is they want to maintain a kind of quality level that isn't possible in the old system of, yes, there are seasons, but no, we're not going to actually take seasonal breaks in the way that lots of shows will finish out their season and then go away for about a year and come back for a year or maybe two and then come back for their next season. And because of that lack of seasonal structure, these shows were ongoing conversations in the fandom for their entire run. One Piece was always on. Dragon Ball Z was always on. Naruto was always on. Bleach was, to everyone's dismay, always on. And the one that suffered the most from that was Bleach, infamously. Bleach infamously started to spiral out into madness pretty quickly after it didn't have any source material. And even that, once it got past the Rukia rescue arc, which is the arc that lots of people stopped at and lots of people recognized as being like, oh, that's the best Bleach was, it never really got the same kind of footing again. But the other thing that separates shonen action anime then from shonen action anime now is a kind of hopefulness and a kind of treatment of its main character as something to be idolized. And I've seen some other people talk about this. But as the world being a thing you can save and can change and can affect in a truly meaningful way. Goku's goal isn't intensely personal. It's about saving people. It's about becoming a hero. It's same thing with Naruto. Naruto's story is intensely personal, and I encourage you to go and watch the original Naruto once you've seen the whole thing to last episode of Naruto Shippuden, before it flips over to Naruto Last and Boruto and all that stuff. But if you've seen that whole thing, go back, or seen the whole canon parts of it, go back and watch the original run of Naruto. And that show hits really differently because you see parts of the show that was parts that Kishimoto set up early in that show that are giving away the game and telling you all the bad things being made to happen specifically to Naruto all the way through. And in something like One Piece, it's clear that Oda has a story mapped out in his head, and he's just plotting his way through it, taking his time with it, and all that stuff. But Luffy's just doing his own thing, and that story is happening as a result of his actions, but Luffy is not set up as driving that story forward. He's constantly, for a lot of that, a happy warrior going through the world, and the world is using what he does to affect itself, if that makes any sense. My point here is that all the big four, even Ichigo, is probably actually similar to Luffy, doing something similar. Ichigo is doing what he wants to save himself and his friends. The rest of the world of Bleach is reacting to it. And the thing with these characters is that they all become larger-than-life protagonists that everything ends up revolving around. But they are affecting the world with their actions and having positive change, and the world is something that can be changed by the protagonist. And then there's a middle part here in big bombastic shonen action shows that was actually best engineered by the creator of Gachiakuta's mentor and boss before she had her own thing, aka Gachiakuta. Because the person that she worked for was the creator of both Fire Force and Soul Eater. And I want to preferences here. If you don't want any spoilers about either of those shows, go get out of here. Because this is your warning. Spoiler alert for both Fire Force and Soul Eater. Because I think the Okubo Sensei, what he's doing with those is he's making a kind of shonen action comedy show in worlds that are broken. Both Soul Eater and Fire Force are post-apocalyptic worlds. In Soul Eater, you get no sense of what the hell happened to the world. Because what the hell happened to the world in Soul Eater happened in Fire Force. Fire Force is actually a prequel in-universe to the world of Soul Eater. And by the time and if you look at Fire Force, the world in Fire Force is much closer to a world that you recognize as our own. But some bad shit has already happened. Stuff has already gone down. And the result of that is that everything feels worse already. The starting point of Fire Force feels so much worse than any of the starting points of any of the big four. Because even Naruto, they've built up a society and it's functioning. Like, you arrive in Naruto, from Naruto's perspective, with a kid who's kind of a misfit, delinquent screw-up. Not knowing anything else, the rest of the world of Naruto is functioning normally. You don't know what's coming in that world, you just know that, oh, I feel bad for this kid. In the world of Bleach, Ichigo is living in modern-day Tokyo. In the world of Dragon Ball, yes, eventually the Saiyans show up, but other than that, the world is the world. The world is everybody going about living in giant cities in future lands. Bulma has tons of money. Goku seems fine until somebody shows up and takes his kid from essentially a cookout held at Master Roshi's island. My point here is that the world state in both of Okubo's most popular works is so much worse than it is in the four shows and properties that largely help define what shonen action shows look like to that point. And when you look at the most recent shonen action shows, they've grown up and changed with the world that they're being made by and being put out into. Even something like Attack on Titan is so much less hopeful than something like Naruto or Dragon Ball Z or even One Piece. It's about being under assault, essentially, by the world around you. And that's what I think we find shonen action shows in general right now. And where I think shonen action shows that have acted as the bridge between generations, something like My Hero Academia, struggle because they're straddling that line really in a way that's really difficult to parse, because you look at a show like My Hero Academia and it has a lot of constraints on it because of the kind of protagonist that Izuku Midoriya is. He's a much more hopeful protagonist than someone like Yuji Itadori or Denji from Chainsaw Man. Yuji Itadori, of course, being from JJK. And it's not that show's not popular. It's it just ended, but it is one of the most popular shonen anime running. But you get a different feeling from watching Izuku Midoriya than you do from watching Denji or Yuji or Ruto from Gachiakuta. In the case of Izuku is still wish fulfillment. He's still a power fantasy. And yes, bad things happen to him, but he is a almost painfully regular nerdy kid who gets superpowers when he didn't already have them. For a character like Denji, his story is much darker. The world around him is much darker. The world around him is not. If the story had not initialized for Denji, he would have not been okay. If the story had not initialized for Yuji might have been fine, but all signs point to not. If the story had not initialized for so many of the the current gen of shonen action characters, they would have not been okay. It wouldn't have been a default state that was just fine. And that's true of Rudo, because it's not... Gachiakuta, and I'm not trying to say that there's not hope in these shows, but I am trying to say that it's farther away, it's less perfect, it's more complicated. In the current era of big, bombastic, huge budget shonen shows, Denji's story is much less cookie cutter and much less hopeful than Naruto's, than Goku's, than even somebody like Yusuke from Yu Yu Hakusho. Because the world has changed, because the stakes are different, because they know that the viewing audience is in a different... They know that the readership and the viewership is in a different place. But also, I think because the creators behind the stuff are different. They grew up in a different world, a different set of problems, and a different mindset. If you look at, for example, Gachiakuta, who's, from what I understand, around my age, he essentially made a much darker version of Naruto and did a lot of work to correct a lot of the errors, especially in female character writing, that occurred in Naruto. You can see it in the Team 7 he's made that is at the center of that show. Yuji is clearly Naruto, right down to having an evil presence sealed inside of him. Fushiguro is clearly Sasuke, right down to the fact that his family is both pivotal and important and not, and deeply cursed to the story. And then Nobara is so incredibly clearly just, I want to write Sakura, but what if she's a badass? And then the whole power system is about embracing and celebrating your flaws. Gojo is Kakashi, but without the mask of pretending he's not completely awesome all the time. And you look at the fact that they also decided to set that show explicitly in the real world, and to set it in Tokyo and make the power system reliant on the fact that bad things happen in certain kinds of places, and that energy lingers, and it causes serious problems. As having a blanket conversation about the malaise and badness that sits just under the surface of most places in humanity. I think about the bad things that happen to you every day, that we just, oh, well, that happens, that's life. Gachiakuta is saying there are purposeful consequences to that, and these are the people who have to deal with them. That's much more where shonen is now. The world Denji lives in is not a consequence-less one where he gets to rise up to the top and there's nothing weighing him down after a while, like Naruto, or Dragon Ball, or Bleach. By the end of those shows, yes, those characters have Luffy, Ichigo, Goku, have all gone through stuff, but Naruto, obviously, but have all gone through stuff, but they're at such a high level that no one can touch them, that they are the fail-safe. Denji, to this point, and granted these stories aren't done yet, these characters may and probably still will get there, but Denji doesn't feel like he is the fail-safe. He feels like he's the scary thing in the room, but he's clearly still touchable by all the bad forces around the world. Same thing with all of the current kind of shonen characters. And that in combination with, once again, the fact that we have a generation of people who grew up with, in the same world that you and I grew up with, if you're around my age. I'm in my 30s. And you have a class of creators creating and talking about a different world than the creators who made, then certainly Toriyama, certainly Kishimoto, certainly Tite Kobu. They are making and talking about very different things because they started their stories in a very different place, in a very different world, in a world that looks very different from what we sit with. The thing I think is really interesting about Gachiakuta, and the thing I think is also interesting about JJK and Chainsaw Man, is all of the creators for a while now, a lot of the creators who are making things in anime and manga have been fans of what came before. And so they make things that emulate in many ways what was, and they keep certain traditions and trim other traditions away. And they combined it to tell stories about things that concern them. So much of Gachiakuta is about the inexorable end to our consumerism, to consumerist culture, and all the other things. Very clearly with the idea of trash punk and punk in general, and the real cruelty of consumerism that you haven't seen a lot of in anime, unless you look at something like Tekken Kinkreet, or notably Battle Angel Alita, which was most recently a live-action film, but helmed by James Cameron for many years as an obsessive property until he couldn't make it, so he tapped, I believe, the director of a Spy Kids movie to make it, and it rules. You should definitely go check that out. But Kei Hirano, the creator of Gachiakuta, is very clearly, in a way that JJK is really, the more you stare at it, a very straight line from Naruto to that show. Kei Hirano is not, she's interested in using the trappings of anime and manga and all that cultural stuff, and having a conversation with you and bring you along with that conversation in a way that lots of other shows cause you to avoid, and I think a lot of this has to do with her voice as a female creator of manga, that you wouldn't trust certain things she does in the hands of many male creators in the genre and of the medium. If you look at Amo's backstory, that thing is horrific. It's unspeakably bad. And even Amo's character design feels a lot like character designs and grossness that people butt up against in other shows. I saw a TikTok a couple days ago that Gurren Lagann, and the person on TikTok was saying, I'm trying to make it through Gurren Lagann, but I can't get past Yoko's character design. If you've never seen Gurren Lagann, it's a fantastic show, but especially if you want more giant robot stuff, I encourage you to go watch Gurren Lagann. It's incredible. And it runs for, I think, 51 episodes. But it is also made by Studio Gainax, and the thing you need to know about Studio Gainax is they perfected a thing that is largely known as the Gainax bounce. And that has to do with female characters and anatomy and character design and animators just having a real good time with all of that. It is a time-honored tradition, the Gainax bounce. But in a universe that has become deeply and meaningfully more censored as time goes on. I talked a little bit on the show before, I think probably before, but also since, about the effects of algospeak and the kind of effects that the platforms wanting to censor certain things for basically the reason of they want to make an advertiser-friendly space has had on people's, not just ability, but willingness to talk about stuff. If you've seen Gachiakuta, if you've seen Gachiakuta, I just tiptoed around Amo's backstory. That's partially because, in my head, I know if I say the words out loud, that makes this a whole different kind of piece of content in the algorithms and what it does with it. But that's not good. My gut feeling is that if the person making TikTok had watched Gurren Lagann in its time, when Gurren Lagann came out, he would feel much different about Yoko's character design and Yoko's physics than he does now. And the kind of genius of Kei Hirano's work with Gachiakuta is that she does all that stuff in Amo. Amo shows up wearing underwear with ribbon lace piercings and a top that barely covers her. And later on, she gets a better character design. I've seen the manga that later on she gets a better character design than that, certainly. But it doesn't feel the same as a character like Yoko because it's not coming from the same place. The thing about... I'm going to talk about a thing said about porn a long time ago. There's a thing said about porn that says, what is porn? Well, I'll know it when I see it. That's not a good enough reason for censorship. That leaves it in the hands of the people doing the censoring, and encompasses all the thought processes of those people, makes those people too powerful. Part of the reason that you don't want to feel like you're being... Like anything is being censored is because everything should be on the table to have a conversation about. And an example is the primary conceit of Gachiakuta. The primary conceit of the world of Gachiakuta is very similar to the primary conceit of the world of Battle Angel Alita. It is a not just consumerist world, but it is an end-state consumerist world. It is a hyper-consumerist world. Actually, it's similar to the world that you see in the Knights of Guinevere. There are the select few whose consumption is unabated, and they do not feel the effects of their wastefulness. But for everyone else, at all times, they are surrounded and encased and defined by that wastefulness. The world of Gachiakuta is one that is built out of the trash of the people at the very top. Of the people not just in the sphere, but on top of the sphere. Because in the world, Ruto is in the middle. Starts in the middle. He then gets thrown to the bottom. But at no point, you only briefly do you see the very top of the pyramid of Gachikuta's society. Most of the time, you're hanging out at the bottom level. At the biggest and bottom level. But that presents the problem. Because this show, much of the world of this show, and much of the power system of this show, is inherently anti-consumerist. I don't know if you're looking at my set, but anime is a very consumerist thing. Very often, as anime fans, we are asked, and we certainly do so, engage in the hobby as consumers. Not just sitting and watching things, but buying stuff. Figures, posters, wall scrolls, clothes, DVDs, the works. This show doesn't just say, hey, we should maybe think about that. It straight up says, this is all trash in the making. And you should maybe be using the stuff you have more effectively and with more time, and be less quick to throw things out, because where will it end up? And in doing so, Kei Hirano has, and this is her right as an artist and a creator, put the engine that runs the consumerist part of being an otaku in a very weird place. Because do you make a scale figure of Ruto or any of the other cast members of Gachiakuta? What happens when that breaks? Do you throw it out? This show's universe tells you the consequences of that. Do you spin up the machine to produce the stuff that most other shows just have? Are there 900 figures of varying oddity and position of Rio in the way that there are 900 figures of Nobara? Is there as much engine merch as there is Gojo merch? So to show the corrective quality that I think the marketing people behind dealing with this show largely are trying their damnedest to do, I want to talk about the Gachiakuta booth and experience that I got to go to in Anime NYC last year. So in Anime NYC last year, there was a big Gachiakuta booth set up. And it was like a game you got to play with a bunch of the other people in line around you. But essentially what it was you were dumpster diving. And you were trying to find whatever you deemed was the most valuable piece of trash. And there were stuff planted in there. I think the one that was what they depicted as the grand prize, which was an enamel pin, was an actual fake human skull. But the interesting thing there is, if you looked at it through any other lens, they weren't giving very big prizes, but it wasn't, and it could have been conceived as cheap. I think I walked away with an iron pasta in the spirit of recycling, turned into a Velcro patch that now sits on the bag that I actually run around Anime NYC every year with. But the prizes were not very big. No point were you going to get a scale figure of Engine or of Rudo or of Rio. The scale of the prizes were small. They were much less wasteful. And I think that works for a show that is largely about the wastefulness of the world around us. It's largely about what's going to happen if we all continue on a path where we don't look at the stuff we have as valuable because it's not the newest. So, I'm a big technology person. I've followed The Verge since its inception, since it wasn't even The Verge, since they were at Engadget, and since they first started doing the video podcast. Now they're back to doing a video podcast. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because I used to be the person who wanted to get the newest phone, the newest thing, all the time. And as time has gone on, that's gotten less and less important to me. Because what was important to me there was not necessarily that I have the newest thing. It was that I have the most capability with the thing that I have. And right up until the panoramic photo update, when, I forget what iPhone this was, but it was a bunch back, when your phone had a panoramic mode for photos, I felt that drive. And the panoramic photo thing was a wall for me. Nothing past the panoramic photo-ness of my phone has ever really mattered as much. Because it never really... In fact, I don't feel like I need to do 12K video. The phone I have is fine. I'm recording this on a specific camera that I bought for this, and I will probably have for a long time yet. But I got what I need. I don't need to... The last time I got a new phone, I replaced the phone I had because my last phone literally stopped working. It turned off and did not turn back on. I think it's still in a drawer. I haven't tossed it yet. But so much of the world of Gachiakuta is built explicitly by throwing away stuff that's still good. Stuff that still has a use. Stuff that still works. World Rudo lives in after the first episode of the show is built out of trash that's disregarded by not just the very top of the world, but the middle. It's revealed pretty quickly that Rudo was not at rock bottom. He was hovering, not comfortably, but he was hovering in the middle of the hierarchy of the show's world. And Rudo's giver power is about extending the life and extending the purpose of individual objects. So, there's a perfect example of this I can actually show you right now. I've got it right here. This is a 3DS. These are obsolete now. This thing is in pretty good shape. It still charges, it still turns on, all that stuff. But the company that makes it, Nintendo, has the Switch and now the Switch 2, so it doesn't need this. And so it turned off the shop for that. If you own a 3DS, you can no longer legally download games from the eShop, because the eShop's been shut down. So, for all intents and purposes, unless you buy actual, and I think I have one in here, I think I have Tetris in here. Unless you buy an actual game card, or you have game cards, which you probably do if you have a 3DS, the thing's a doorstop. The thing's a fancy doorstop. Lots of people threw these away. Lots of people still have them, because retro gaming is a very specific need. Lots of people sold them. But I bet a lot of people threw them away. I bet a lot of people took their perfectly good, perfectly usable, deeply entertaining, at one point hundreds of dollars 3DSs and tossed them. Now, I know a lot about sustainability, and I can tell you a 3DS has a lithium-ion battery. It's made of plastic and probably has heavy and precious metals in there that will stay in a landfill for generations. A 3DS is very much a thing that Rudo could find in a trash pile. But the conceit of not just Rudo, but the power system of the show says that these things are precious. This is a big deal of a thing. There should be a kind of nobility in saying, this is my thing. I will have it forever. I will take care of it as if it is part of me. And I think we all have stuff like that. I think we all have precious objects, not just in the vein of a vital instrument, but in the real vein of people's vital instruments. People's glasses are this for the people who wear glasses. There are medical devices that are similar. There are just personal keepsakes that are similar. And it's not... The show shows givers and their relationship with their vital instruments as being deeply important and something that givers inherently understand about each other, but people who aren't givers really have a difficult time wrapping their heads around. They don't have the same... People who aren't givers, the show posits, explicitly don't have that same relationship with their stuff that givers do. And even givers have a specific relationship with a specific object they don't have with other objects. If you look at Rio, just has a gun. She doesn't treat it the same way she treats her scissors, because the emotional attachment there is not to the gun, it's to the scissors. And there's certain things that she explicitly says, I'm not going to use my scissors to kill people. They're too good for that. They deserve better. That's what the gun is for. And Rudo even said, the gun is for the worst version of me that will just kill a bitch. The scissors are for fighting trash beasts and defending and cleaning up this mess of a world. They are not for taking a life. They are for fighting, but not ending an opponent. Because that's what the worst version of me would do to solve a conflict. And the show says this pretty explicitly. It says that Rudo is totally capable of killing people. But that's the worst version of her. The better version of her accomplishes the same goal without taking a life. And I think that's really interesting, because it's the worst version of this written by somebody who does not have such a attunement to what the potential of the giver-object power system would do. Makes people's precious objects, I'm forgetting the term, things like guns, things like swords, things that are intentional weapons of death. The closest you get on screen is Zanka's pole, Zanka's staff. And Zanka was trained with that staff, but he picked that staff because he thought it was the least likely to be the most effective weapon. And Zanka's staff is based off of an actual crowd control staff thing. But that's the closest you get to an actual weapon. If you look at Engin's weapon, it's an umbrella. If you look at Amo's, it's boots. If you look at Rudo's, it's gloves. If you look at Semu's, it's a pair of glasses. These Remlins, there's lots of R names. If you look at Remlins, it's a marker that can transform into any form of artistic, expressive tool possible. First thing Remlin does is turn into a paintbrush. One of the second thing she does is, I believe, turn it into a tattoo machine, which they promptly stop her from doing on Rudo's back. But the point is that this show has found a way to have a conversation about the things that we use day to day, and the idea that you can ascribe deep value to them that lots of people don't. And there's, of course, an analogy here that's perfect, and that is lots of artists have very specific tools that they use, and even beyond the tools they use to create what they want to make, those tools are then further customized and further filled with and have a specificity that's specific to the artist that is different from what you might choose, and certainly different from the default. A perfect example is my version of the stuff I use in Procreate is very different from the stuff that any of the artists who I've talked to before would probably use in Procreate. There probably is some overlap there, but the way I use brushes, the thickness and heaviness of my lines are very different from Phil Tomato's, are very different from Jessica Luna's, because they're specific to me. And those line weights are specific and important to me for very specific and different reasons. And if you go listen to both those conversations, Phil Tomato's goal of what he does when he's making art is very different from Jess's. And as a result, the products are different. They both can look at each other's work and be like, whoa, that's really cool. I love that. But that's not a thing they want to make themselves. I think Kei Hirano, I'd be really interested to see more of her actually working and see what she uses to make manga, because it's probably pretty specific. She may have been using the same G pen since she was a kid. In order to envision relationships with objects, characters have relationships with literal objects in this show, you probably have to know a little bit about what that feels like and what people's relationships with their most prized possessions looks and feels like. And I think that once Rudo says the name of his gloves out loud, you realize that Kei Hirano is going for the jugular with all of the trash commentary and with all of the recycling commentary, because Rudo called his gloves R3 because it stands for reduce, recycle. I don't think that's a mistake. You gotta be really boneheaded to put that in your show about a world built out of trash and it not be on purpose. Because, once again, Rudo's giver power is giving power into objects that have already, quote-unquote, lived a full life. He picks things out of the trash and converts them into something new, into something with more purpose. And then once that's done, they crumble and they blow away in the wind like sand. As if to say, his giver power is not creating trash. It does not create trash. It can't create trash. What it is doing, it is completing in a meaningful way the life cycle of an object. Once he uses an object, it can't be used again. It's not possible. It literally crumbles to dust. It's not even adding to the massive piles of trash around him, because Rudo's whole thing is that everything is precious. He sees the potential in everything. The show opens up with him taking a doll that could have meaningfully been repaired by anybody and repairing it after it's been disregarded by the very top of the sphere. And he gives it to his childhood crush, essentially, who then disregards it in the same breath that she disregards him. And part of that, his hatred of the sphere, is almost certainly rooted in his disappointment in his childhood crush, in his disappointment in the confines and societal structures that make that a thing. So, not only am I a big technology person, but I'm a big fashion person, and also culture and art person, but I collect watches. And it's been long known that one of the safest places to wear a luxury watch, not that I have really any in my collection, or I have watches that would probably be considered luxury, but not like most people think of as like a Royal Oak or I don't have any of those. But lots of really high-end watch collectors, there are certain places where they just won't wear anything in their collection. or they won't wear anything that's like figure like $1,000 watches because it's not safe. And one of the places that is safe to do that kind of thing, because the wealth is so all-encompassing, is the AEU, Dubai specifically. And recently I had this thought of like, if it's not safe, if like you're worried about getting, say, your Birkin bag stolen on the streets of London, or your watch stolen on the streets of New York, what does that say about the world around you? What does that say about the amount you have that any given person around you does not have? You know, the Gachiakuta is a world of consequences that is explicitly not being felt by the people at the very top of Gachiakuta's kind of. The people at the top, the smallest segment, experiencing what they perceive at least as all of the benefits. But even in the moment at the very beginning of the series, that you see the characters at the top of the sphere, where everything's clean and beautiful and white and stark and spotless. That little girl, like, she's a bunny rabbit. She wants her doll. Her mother is the one who makes her throw it out because it's damaged. It's missing a stitch. It's not really damaged. It had been repaired and no one would know. It was made to just toss away a thing that she found precious. And you see later that Ruto fixed it easily. He didn't even stitch it. He ties a scarf around its neck. It still looks good as new. That little girl is left with a slight hollow feeling, I'm sure. But the trash that was created, the real, the problem, dropped down to the next segment of the pyramid. Ultimately, it drops all the way down to the bottom of the pyramid. The consequences of that waste are only in the smallest way felt by the top of that hierarchy. And I think the kind of rage that Ruto feels in his anger at the sphere is not anger at individual people. I think that's the target he's picked because he's a punk kid who is rightfully mad about the fact that everybody up until the beginning of the story has just kind of why he was down, or almost everybody. And then eventually everybody in his world was either taken from him or threw him away like trash. But what he's angry at is the whole of the thing. He's angry at the sphere because of what the sphere represents. And then by the end of the show, when someone shows up and says, hey, you want to go blow that thing out of the sky with me? He started to understand that maybe he's not angry at those specific people, but he is angry at the system that made it happen. And like I said at the beginning when we were talking about the difference between the before era of shonen action and the era we're in now, I think what the best, and I think that Gachiakuta is among the best of shonen action shows they're dealing with now, is much less about kind of fantasy story and much more about characters earnestly trying to fix the world they're in. Not save it, but fix it. Genji is on a path of fixing a lot of things that are currently wrong with the world around him. Kafka from Kaiju number 8 is, yes, fighting Kaiju number 9, but he's much more focused on protecting the world and world where the kinds that happen to him and Mina in their early lives don't happen to people. Yuji is trying to fix a broken thing. He's trying to affect the world and protect the people he loves. It's not about him. A lot of Ruto's anger is not about him. It's not about what was done to him. It's about the system as a whole. And yes, the system has held down and stamped on him in ways that is incredibly cruel, and it's caused him to be not even angry or hateful, but filled with a kind of wrath that if you look at it directly, as Semu did, it scares you. Semu straight up said, I know it's in him, but it's not good. It's pretty bad, guys. you should all watch out. He's pretty pissed about all of it. Indiscriminately. And I think, in the way that I think Gege Akutami, JJK, gets it, there being something fundamentally wrong with the world around us. And I think that, Faith, the author of Chainsaw Man, also gets at that. I think that Kei Hirano is getting at something's fundamentally wrong with the kind of the world right now. And once again, I say this surrounded by consumerist stuff on purpose in a set I built. But also, like, I have here is something I didn't already have. Not like I went, actually that's not true, the camera I'm taping on is something I didn't already have. But the set you see is stuff I've had for a long time. And I think you can see kind of our tiredness with consumer culture in the fact that we're not updating our phones as much. We're not running out and buying necessarily the new greatest much, because it's much easier now because there's much less room for improvement than there was when people first started doing the upgrade cycle thing. I know I only get a new phone, like I said, when I literally need a new phone. I'm much less eager to pull the trigger on buying something new if I have something I know can do what I need it to do. And if I buy something new, it's for a specific purpose that I know I'll use it for, like the I'm recording on right now. And I buy what I need and not a whole lot more, because I don't think that's sustainable. And I think so much about, I mean, you gotta be blind to not know that so much about Gachiakuta is about sustainability and about the kind of flawed mindset of, if something breaks, you don't try and fix it, you just go and replace it and toss what you had. And I that as a guiding ethos for not just the show's world, but the show's power system is really interesting. And that's where I'm going to leave it.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the podcast, and if you did, be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. If you're listening to it on a podcast platform and they allow you to give a 5-star review, be sure to do that. If you're watching this on YouTube and you really liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the video. In addition, if you want to make sure that you don't miss a beat, be sure to hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes drop. But if you're wondering, they drop every Thursday night Eastern time. And on that note, if you really love the podcast and you really love what I'm trying to do here, be sure to give the website a look. That website is bento-box.ghost.io. There will be a link in the description of either this podcast or this video. It'll also be linked in the description of the entire podcast on the information page. It'll also be linked in the description of the YouTube channel. So there's plenty of ways for you to get to that website and check it out. If you want to follow me, my social links are also listed in the footer of that page. So once again, go over there to find that stuff. But I hope you liked the episode. I look forward to talking to you next time. But until next time, I have been Alex. This has been Bento Radio, and I'll talk at you later.